Okay, great. So we're going to start the session on the role of consensus protocol in stability and scalability of blockchains. And so in the past 24 hours, Bitcoin's blockchain added about 3.3 transactions per second at an average fee of about $2.70 per transaction. Right, and compared to the thousands of transactions per second executed by Visa and MasterCard at a trivial cost, 3.3 transactions is not exactly great if you, like Satoshi Nakamoto, want Bitcoin to be a prominent medium of exchange. So of course, there's this big question of to other cryptocurrencies as well. Now, an obvious thing to consider when we talk about Bitcoin's ability to scale is its block size, right? Every block added to Bitcoin's blockchain can only hold a limited number of transactions. And so we might consider moving to a larger block size. And indeed, some Bitcoin forks have done just that. But the technical limit on block size isn't really the only constraint that we need to think about when we're thinking about the number of transactions per block. The miners themselves can effectively choose how many transactions. And the session's first paper by Malik Asari Singh and Srinivasan is going to take this margin very seriously, looking at miners' incentives to limit the number of transactions per block. Now, in microeconomics, and I'm a microeconomist, market power refers to the ability to increase prices, typically by lowering the quantity. And that's exactly what's happening here, right? Miners can get higher fees by allowing fewer transactions. And just as market context of the first paper, we're going to see, we need large miners. For an individual miner isn't going to have an incentive to limit the fee they accept, unless they're winning blocks with a relatively high frequency. And so ultimately, Malik and co-authors are going to argue that this is a serious constraint and one that we can't really relax without making Bitcoin less secure. Okay, so looking beyond block size, we can think about block time. Bitcoin's block time is about 10 minutes. And naively, one might think that we can just increase the rate of transactions by speeding up the blocks. And in a sense, of course, that's true, but doing so may change the computational power that's needed to effectively take control of the blockchain. And when we think about the ease of taking control of the blockchain, that depends upon the hash rate. And if we think about changing the block duration, it's not like we can just expect the hash rate to stay fixed. And that's because the number of miners participating is going to depend on the rate of fees being earned, and the rate of fees being earned depends on the number of users and the rate of transactions. So the bottom line is, this is going to preview kind of a central theme of the session's second paper by John Rivera and Saleh, that the security of a cryptocurrency is ultimately an equilibrium phenomenon, right? The security of a cryptocurrency is not a simple technical property. It's something that emerges in equilibrium. That's not to say that the protocol doesn't matter. Of course, the protocol matters a lot, and ultimately, the second paper is going to contrast the proof of work protocol and proof of stake protocols. Proof of work being the protocol that Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies currently use, that's going to ensure that it's costly to participate in the network, and proof of stake being a protocol in which would-be validators have to kind of lock up some of their cryptocurrency for a period of time. So Rivera and co-authors are going to compare these two protocols, not just from the kind of technical perspective, but by thinking carefully about the incentives that the cryptocurrency's protocol sets up for all the agents involved. And Satoshi, to some extent, was thinking about the incentives of the miners participating, but we're going to think not just about the incentives of the existing miners, but also new potential miners, and also the users participating in the cryptocurrency. Okay. So a third way of scaling transactions is to use payment channel networks, like the Lightning Network. And these sorts of networks can effectively implement a large number of off-chain transactions among some network of users and of payers and payees, while recording only a relatively small number of transactions on the blockchain. Now, while Bitcoin's proof of work system discourages sock puppetry by making it costly to do, the third paper of this session by Han, Liu, and Yu is going to look at these payment channel networks, which kind of sit outside of or adjacent to the Bitcoin protocol, and consider how vulnerable they are to sock puppetry. And the message is going to be somewhat pessimistic, for they find that inexpensive attacks can ultimately undermine the liquidity of these payment channel networks. Okay, so scaling number of transactions is one aspect of scaling, but another very important aspect of scaling is the tremendous expense on validation through Bitcoin's proof of work system. And recently, Bitcoin's network has used as much energy as a medium-sized country, emitting the greenhouse gas emissions of a small country. And this is obviously bad, right? And from this angle, the question of scaling can become a question of whether society should actually want Bitcoin to grow or even exist at all when its existence comes at such a high cost. And so the fourth paper of the session by Eyal, Spiegelman, and Saberi is going to focus on this issue, introducing the promising idea that perhaps some of Bitcoin's external validation costs can be replaced with some internal expenditures. This would reduce the overall computational burden of the protocol for when these external costs mean computational costs, and internal costs would be on-chain and kind of not correspond to any physical costs at all. Now, this idea of on-chain costs is related to the proof of stake idea, but as Saberi and co-authors are going to explain, the mechanism they propose is going to avoid some of the weaknesses of this proof of stake idea. All right, so with that, I want to remind everybody we're gonna try to leave questions to the end of the session, but please put your questions in the chat. And at the end of the session, time permitting, there probably won't be very much, but hopefully there'll be a little. I'll try to read some questions out, or I can call on some of you to ask some questions. And we will have breakout rooms during the break, so there'll be a bit of time for questions and discussions there. And so with that, I see Nikhil is sharing his screen, and I'll turn the floor over to Nikhil Malik.
Hey, thanks a lot, Paul, for the introduction. This certainly makes the job of the speaker way easier to connect the dots together. I hope someone will point out if they are having trouble hearing me, but it's my pleasure to talk about our work titled Why Bitcoin Will Fail to Scale. Beneath this exciting looking title, effectively what I will talk about is economics of miner collusion on blockchains. And as described by Paul, this research is positioned in the middle of this debate about limited capacity and high fees on Bitcoin and Bitcoin-like blockchains. So we know at least two instances, December 2017 and April 2021, where Bitcoin's transaction fees spiked above $50 per transaction. And that wasn't so much of a surprise. Bitcoin allows addition of a block of 2,000 transactions every 10 minutes. That's very, very small compared to its traditional competitors. And a simple solution comes to mind. Why not just increase the block size? You can increase the block size, you can make the blocks more frequent. There are a few different ways you can increase the capacity on this blockchain. But something makes this idea, the simple looking idea, a little bit murkier. And so I go to a couple of tweets that allege some sort of suspect behavior from Bitcoin miners. And so this particular tweet alleges that Antpool, which was a major miner back in 2016, adds a block using just 300 kilobytes out of the available 1,000 kilobytes allowed by the Bitcoin protocol. And they add this partially filled block even when 61,000 transactions are waiting in queue. These are transactions willing to offer fees. The same thing happens a little later. Again, 24% of the capacity is utilized, where tens of thousands of transactions are waiting in queue. And in fact, the Bitcoin miner responds with a tweet saying they'll continue to add these empty blocks or partial blocks because of the freedom given by the Bitcoin protocol. And so this motivates our research. Yes, we can increase block size, make them more frequent, but do miners really have the incentives to utilize the available capacity? So with that, here are three main questions that I'll try to cover in the talk today. The first question is, can blockchain capacity really be increased by simply increasing the block size? And we'll answer it with a no, because we'll show that miners will collude to underutilize the available capacity. Second question is, sure, in theory, miners could collude, but is that really a viable mechanism for small miners to sustain this coordination? We'll again answer with a yes, that under the right conditions on the mining hardware distribution, a fairly large number of small miners can in fact sustain such a collusion. The last question is more a philosophical question that I'll end the talk at, which is going to ask, is this collusion among miners good or bad? Because on one end, we'll show that collusion will limit capacity and extract excess transaction fee rents, but indirectly, it's also going to offer protection against double spend attacks. So it's not clear if collusion is necessarily a bad thing. So let me set out the roadmap for this quick glimpse of our research. So this is a game theoretic piece of research. So I'll start by setting the model environment and describe a game where users and miners engage. I'll connect this model to a lot of literature on both on the computer science side as well as economics of blockchain. Then I'll try to provide a very quick intuition for 2 or 3 of our main results. And finally, circle back to this question of what's the overall implication of collusion? Is this a good thing or bad? Okay. So this is our model. We have an infinite time model where we have n users who make up a static demand for payments on the blockchain. We have infinite miners. The users are modeled as heterogeneous in payment value V. They derive utility from making these payments right now, and they dislike paying fees. They dislike delays. They dislike security risk from double spend attacks. The users are myopic about utility from the current payment. So they are not forward looking into what payment needs they might have in the future. The miners are modeled as heterogeneous in computing resources, specifically the hash power and the cost of computing they have access to. They derive revenues from transaction fees alone and not block rewards. In the paper, we do discuss block rewards and how to that change of results, but for now, I'll skip that part. And finally, miners are modeled, unlike users, they're modeled as strategic about lifetime profits. So miners are not only trying to maximize transaction fee they can gain from the current block, but transaction fee they can gain from future blocks they might mine. So let me now sort of arrange these 2 agents in a sequence of actions that they take. Let me minimize this. Okay. I wouldn't go too much detail into the notations or the payoffs, but I'll just focus more on the agents and the sequence of actions that they are taking. So we start with a user who's trying to make a payment of value V. One option they have is they can go off-chain to a traditional channel like a bank, Swift, credit card, or so on. Or they could go on-chain, where they'll have to submit a fee bid F of V. Now, this user and number of competing users will submit these bids. The next thing that will happen is a block will get added onto the blockchain, which will record all these payments. Now, this is where we introduce the concept of partial blocks and full blocks. So typically, we expect that if more than 2,000 transactions are submitting a bid, a miner would create a full block of 2,000 transactions, maybe pick up the top 2,000 bids offered by the users. But we introduce this concept, there are some colluding miners out there who, instead of utilizing the full capacity of 2,000 transactions, only utilize a partial capacity of 1,200 transactions. 1,200 is just an example. Now, users, in anticipation of possibly finding a partial block, have to raise their fees because the competition for capacity just got more aggressive. They'll have to increase fees in the first step in the anticipation that they might encounter this partial block. And they don't know upfront if they're going to encounter a partial block or a full block, because upfront they don't know if the mining puzzle will be won by a colluding miner or a passive miner. And we denote the fraction of power controlled by colluding miner by alpha. So there's alpha probability that the next block will be a partial block. There's 1 minus alpha probability that the next block is going to be a full block. And so the capacity for the chain becomes alpha multiplied by 1,200, 1 minus alpha multiplied by 2,000. So that's So the expected capacity becomes smaller than 2000 overall. Now in this game tree, this is shown more from the point of view of the user. What is implicit here is that miners first make a choice whether to enter the network or not. And then they make a choice whether to act as a colluding miner or a passive miner. And they'll have to make this choice in a repeated game where do they commit to adding partial block now and in the future, or do they deviate to start creating full blocks or vice versa. So this has to be in equilibrium both from the user's point of view, but also from the miner's point of view. The quantities f of v, which is the bidding strategy, the fraction of miners that choose to collude alpha, and the partial capacity n of p are all endogenous, are all equilibrium outcomes that we'll calculate in the paper by solving this game. Let me now relate this model to some of the existing literature. So there's quite a lot of work on user fee models, and our work sort of takes Huberman et al. As the starting point as to how to think about the fee auctions that users enter into. Again, there's a lot of work on miner entry models. Arnaustein-Weinberg is one example that looks at miners that are heterogeneous in their computing power. Again, that's very similar to how we model miners as well. We also model a double spend attack to operationalize security threat on the users. And I would say our model is perhaps a great simplification of what's done by Chio and Kopel. In fact, in the paper, we discuss that we land up in some nitty-gritty contradictory conclusions compared to the existing papers, but that's something that I'll again skip for now. Most importantly, our work sort of continues on the thread of tacit collusion over repeated games, started way back by Green and Porter, and there have been a lot of work in blockchain ecosystem as well, which utilizes the fact that competitors can coordinate on blockchain because they can credibly reveal their commitment on the public blockchain. So we're going to use the same flavor of commitment to this collusion strategy. One paper that perhaps has a fair amount of similarity is a contemporary recent paper by Lehar and Parler. And they tie a lot of this work very close to empirical data. And they show that out of $850 million in user fees in 4 years, they claim that $560 million is excess fee extracted by miners using strategic capacity management. Their mechanism of collusion and strategic capacity management is slightly different. They come up with slightly different predictions about what the world would look like. But this sort of provides a fair amount of evidence that there is still an ongoing extraction of excess rents from transaction fees by miners, large miners coordinating on capacity management. All right. With that, let me now go to 2 or 3 of the main results that we get out of our model. The first result looks at the choice of partial block fill level that would be used by the colluding miner. Now, capital N is the total demand for payments, and F is the full capacity, 2000, and then P is the equilibrium level of partial fill level that the colluding miners would use. Now, instead of going through the expressions, I'll provide an intuition more visually. So at the bottom, what I'm showing is sort of an axis, which is going from collusion group size 0 to size 1. 1 means everyone is colluding, 0 means no one is colluding. What we are showing is the collusion group size is less than alpha lower bar. There is no collusion effectively, and there's a full capacity utilization on the blockchain. If the collusion group size goes beyond alpha over bar, then there is monopoly capacity utilization. It's as if a monopolist is controlling how much capacity to utilize. All the points in between are sort of a mixture of a full capacity and monopoly capacity utilization. So what we'll mostly focus on is this alpha lower bar. This is the minimum amount of mining power that a collusive group has to hold to pull off this partial block filling strategy. So the next result looks at conditions on the hardware distribution, specifically the cost of computing and hash power, that make that alpha lower bar collusion possible. And again, without going into the expression, what this is essentially finding is that if you were to rank miners from left to right on their computational efficiency, again, efficiency is a combination of their cost of computing and hash power, then there will be alpha lower bar most efficient miners that will form the colluding group. There is 1 minus alpha bar sort of second segment of miners that act passively, that in fact benefit from the collusion, but don't actually engage in partial filling. And the remaining miners stay out of the mining network because they're simply not efficient enough to make positive profits. And we find conditions on this curve. What does this curve have to look like for this sort of a collusion to be sustained? Again, sort of some of the expressions I would skip, but essentially it's talking about how flat, what's the flatness of the curve and how long the tails have to be for this sort of collusion to be stable and equilibrium. The last result that I will point out today is, given that this sort of a collusion of partial block filling can be sustained, it's credible, it works out from the miner's point of view, what is the fee bidding strategy followed by the users? And what we show here, again, on the x-axis, is users who have payment value 0 up to payment value infinity. And what we, in equilibrium, we find that there are 4 segments of users. Users that have very low payment value would simply not be willing to offer any fees because the fees are too high for them to enter. Then there is second segment of users who offer a low fee level. These are users who are fine if their transaction gets recorded in the full block, and they're fine if the transaction gets excluded by the partial block. Then we have a third segment. These are users who care sufficiently about urgency that they want to make sure their transaction goes through irrespective whether the next block is partially filled or fully filled. So they offer this high fees. And there's a fourth segment of users who don't enter because of security threat from double spend attacks. And in fact, we endogenize the fact that the revenues that are collected from these fees, the FL and the FH, is what's driving the security on this blockchain. So the more the revenues are collected, the lower the incentive to double spend attack the chain, the more secure the chain would be. And so lower would be this fourth segment. And that sort of takes us to this final point about how collusion is actually offering some level of security. In collusion, because the miners restrict capacity, it raises the fees, it makes the chain secure. If collusion was absent, you would have a scenario where the fee levels would come down, more number of payments would be allowed through, but at the same time, the security of the chain would also reduce. And so you have this huge segment on the right-hand side where users with large payment values don't enter because of potential double spend attack threats. So in a way, the collusion is dynamically adjusting capacity and fee revenues to protect against these double spend attack threats. Now with that, let me conclude by putting it all together in terms of the blockchain trilemma, where first we start with scalability, and we say that collusion is making things more expensive, it's lowering capacity, but it's also making the chain responsive to demand. So the level of partial fill that the collusion miners decide is going to change based on how much demand of payment users have. Now, because of the collusion, more rents are extracted from the users, so more miners will also enter the network, and therefore there'll be larger resource commitment, larger degree of decentralization on the network. That in turn will increase security, it will lower the double spend probability, and will increase security bounds, which in fact will increase the US dollar throughput on the blockchain. So even though fewer transactions will be allowed, US dollar worth of transactions that are allowed on the chain would actually increase. And so that's where sort of we conclude that miner collusion can be an effective mechanism to dynamically balance this blockchain trilemma. As the demand in the market changes, the miners could coordinate and collude to sort of dynamically change the capacity available on the network to sort of balance around the weights on this trilemma. But I leave sort of this philosophical question open. So sort of for the audience to make up their mind if overall these pros and cons is collusion a good thing or bad. Let me stop there. And thanks to the audience. And if there's time, I'm happy to answer questions right now, or perhaps in the Zoom breakout session a little later.
Yeah, I think we'll have to defer any questions. So thank you very much, Nikhil. And I think you'll have to take down your share so that I think Thomas Rivera is gonna present the next paper.
Okay, can you hear me well? All right, thank you.
Yep.
So thanks to the organizers for putting together this great little conference. This is joint work with Koos John and Fahad Saleh, and I'm Thomas Rivera. So this is a paper, excuse me. Okay, this is a paper about the economic implications of blockchain governance. So possibly an unnecessary refresher, blockchain is a decentralized distributed ledger. The ledger records history of cryptocurrency transactions. It's stored and maintained across a network, and it's decentralized in the sense that there's no one central trusted entity that chooses which transactions get added to the ledger. Now, the key innovation that allows blockchain to operate is these governance rules which decide this updating procedure, crucially with the goal in mind of maintaining a consensus for one true history of the blockchain ledger. So in this paper, we're going to focus on two types of these governance rules, also known as consensus protocols, which are proof of work and proof of stake. I think people are more familiar with proof of work. This is the protocol that governs Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many other blockchains, whereas proof of stake is sort of an up-and-coming competitor to proof of work. For example, Ethereum is building the infrastructure now to switch from a proof of work to a proof of stake blockchain. Okay, I'll explain what's the difference between these consensus protocols in a few slides, but the main point is that this is really what governs the blockchain and allows it to operate.
Thomas, I still see your title slide and it's not maximized. Is that what we're supposed to be?
Sorry, let me, yeah, I should have been on the first slide. Let me try again.
See the economics of blockchain governance now.
Okay, we're good. Can you see my third slide now?
Nope.
Huh. How about now?
Looking good now, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I was just explaining these different governance protocols or consensus protocols as they're commonly referred to. Now, in this paper, what we want to understand is the economic implications of scaling a blockchain and whether it matters whether the blockchain is governed by proof of work or proof of stake. So when we say scaling, we're talking about increasing the rate at which transactions are added to the blockchain. And this is naturally an important feature for practitioners and users alike, because as we can all imagine, having your transactions clear faster is generally a better thing for the use of this cryptocurrency. So this line of thinking leads to a general lay intuition, which is that faster processing will just enhance user utility and spur more adoption of the cryptocurrency. And what we want to show in this paper is that this lay intuition need not be correct once you account for certain security implications of scaling a blockchain. And in fact, these results differ across proof of work and proof of stake. So just stating the main result, scaling a proof of work blockchain beyond a certain point will become self-defeating in that it will generate zero adoption and therefore zero utility, making itself obsolete. Whereas in contrast, scaling a proof of stake blockchain is always going to enhance user utility, subject to network latency issues, which we abstract from, but this is always going to be a good thing for proof of stake blockchain and its adoption. Okay, so for the rest of the talk, I'd like to explain the intuition as to why these results hold. Before I get there, I'm just going to give us a brief model overview, kind of what model we're using to derive these types of results. So we model blockchain as a payment system with an overlapping generation of users. So you have these older users that are departing. They're looking to liquidate any of their cryptocurrency that they purchased previously in exchange for some consumption goods, which the arriving users come with. The arriving users, we assume, have access to some outside option. You can transact through an alternative technology with a fixed cost. And so they need to decide whether they want to use that technology or to purchase the cryptocurrency from the departing users. The users have utility over their end of day consumption, end of life consumption, and a heterogeneous disutility from waiting. So this is where scale is going to become an important factor for the adoption decision, because there's going to be some very impatient users that just simply won't find it optimal to adopt the blockchain if the scale is not high enough. Okay, so in this sense, when it's time for you to liquidate your cryptocurrency, because of the finite transaction processing rate, you're going to have to wait some time, and that amount of time is going to depend on the scale of the blockchain. Okay, at the same time, we're going to model a malicious agent that benefits from rendering the blockchain inoperable. And we're going to do this by assuming that at each point in time, the agent draws a random benefit from successfully attacking the blockchain. And then they initiate that attack if the benefit is higher than the cost of attacking the blockchain. And we're going to precise exactly what this cost is and how it depends on whether the blockchain is proof of work or proof of stake and the scale. So of course, the users, they're going to internalize the security risk, depending on whether the blockchain is governed by proof of work or proof of stake. And they're going to adopt the cryptocurrency as a means of payment if transacting with the cryptocurrency is higher than their outside option. So now I'll go to proof of work. I'll explain why scaling is generally bad for proof of work, and then I'll discuss proof of stake after. So proof of work blockchain confers control to update the next block of transaction according to a computational contest known as mining. At a very high level, you're sort of plugging in some numbers into a function, looking for a desired output. You don't really know the relationship between the input and the output. So the best thing you can do is just keep plugging in numbers. And that's why this is referred to as a computational contest. Now, importantly, controlling the blockchain or updating the next block, it's going to be allocated in proportion to your computational expenditure that you exert trying to solve this puzzle. So if I exert, for example, more computational expenditure than one of you, I will have a higher likelihood of solving this puzzle first, and therefore being allocated the right to update the next block in the blockchain. Now, from the attacker's perspective, attacking the blockchain requires controlling the block creation process, and therefore it's going to require exerting a certain amount of computational expenditure with respect to the sort of equilibrium hash rate or the amount of expenditure being exerted by the other miners in the system. Okay, mining is competitive, due to free entry. So we're going to assume that mining expenditure is going to be equal to mining revenue. And therefore, the proof of work security is going to depend on this endogenous mining revenue, and that's going to drive a lot of our results. In particular, as in practice, we allow the users to pay fees, so you can attach a fee to your transaction, and then the miners can look at the pending transactions, and they're going to choose the ones, assuming they're not colluding, like in Nikal's model, they're going to choose the transactions with the highest fees, and they're going to add those to maximize miner revenue. Okay. Now, as the scale increases, naturally, the wait times are going to decrease, and the optimal fees are going to decline. Now, this is just like thinking, your willingness to pay to cut the line, it should be decreasing in the size of the line. So faster transaction processing is going to lead to lower fees in equilibrium, which we show in the paper. And therefore, as you increase the scale, you lower mining revenue, you lower mining expenditure, and therefore you lower the cost of attacking the blockchain, and therefore the security of the blockchain. Okay, for a sufficiently high scale, we show how this is going to render the blockchain entirely insecure, in which case no user will find it optimal to transact with the cryptocurrency just for the fear of this security threat. Okay, so that's the result for proof of work. Now the result for proof of stake, which is that scaling is generally a good thing. Just to give you an idea of how proof of stake works, in general, proof of stake is going to confer control to update the next block according to a lottery known as staking. So basically, to participate in this lottery, you agree to lock up your cryptocurrency, meaning to not trade it for some fixed period of time. And then the protocol at predetermined intervals is going to select a unit of cryptocurrency from the pool of staked currency. And the owner of that cryptocurrency is going to be allocated the right to update the next block in the blockchain. Now, what this means is that control is conferred in proportion to the number of cryptocurrency units that you stake. So if I stake more units than one of you, I have a higher likelihood of winning this lottery and therefore a higher likelihood of being selected to update the next block in the blockchain. Again, from the attacker's perspective, attacking the blockchain now, the cost of successfully attacking is going to be the cost of owning a large enough proportion of the cryptocurrency and staking that cryptocurrency to be able to win the lottery with sufficient frequency. Okay, what this means is that the cost of controlling the blockchain and therefore the security of a proof of stake blockchain is going to depend on the endogenous cryptocurrency's market value. Okay, and what we're going to show is that increasing the scale increases the market value, makes it more costly to purchase the necessary amount of cryptocurrency to successfully attack the blockchain, and therefore makes the proof of stake blockchain more secure. So the reason for this is that, as with proof of work, the fees are also declining with the blockchain scale. This is independent of the governance protocol. But unlike proof of work, there's no implication for security due to reduced fee revenue. So the fees now, they also go back to the users that stake, that are selected to update the block. But the decrease in the fee revenue doesn't change their incentive to stake, because staking is not costly, unlike mining, where you have to expend this computational energy, and that's costly for you. So lowering mining revenues lowers your mining expenditure, but lowering your staking revenues doesn't lower your staking incentives. Instead, the higher scale is now going to imply a higher user utility, because your transactions are getting processed faster, you're offering lower fees, and therefore more users are going to adopt the blockchain. The higher adoption means a higher demand for the cryptocurrency, and therefore a higher market value for the cryptocurrency. And therefore, that's the reason why when you increase scale, you increase security of the blockchain. And we show that for a sufficiently high scale, this means the agent, if they have a meaningful bound on their wealth, then they're going to succeed with zero probability. But otherwise, the security is going to be increasing in the scale of the blockchain. Okay, so one thing I haven't talked about yet is block rewards. So block rewards are the newly issued cryptocurrency paid to the validator that updates the next block. And so this also constitutes mining revenue. And we show that lower fees from scaling a proof of work blockchain lowers the security. So now a natural question is, well, how about you increase the scale, and at the same time you increase the block rewards so that the miners still have the incentive to exert the high level of computational expenditure. And what we show is that this is not going to help us solve the problem, because of the fact that block rewards are inflationary. So remember that the user's adoption decision depends on the security, but it also depends on sort of the utilities they get from using the cryptocurrency, as opposed to their outside option. And if you increase block rewards, this is increasing inflation, and therefore, even if the blockchain is completely secure, it's lowering the value of transacting with this cryptocurrency. So basically, what we show that, in fact, for a fixed outside option, there's an upper bound on which you can set the block rewards. If you go above that, no one will use the cryptocurrency as a means of payment, and therefore the ability to increase block rewards with the scale is highly limited. Okay, now this block reward effect actually doesn't hold in a proof of stake blockchain because of the fact that these block rewards are paid back to the validators that update the blocks, the stakers that update the blocks. And so there's essentially an irrelevance of block rewards on the adoption decisions, provided that the users are all homogeneous. Now, we have a further paper. If you find this interesting or you have some questions about this, we have a further paper on staking incentives when users are heterogeneous. It doesn't change the results of this paper, but it talks a little bit more about this relationship between block rewards and staking. You can find it at this URL or on my website. Okay, so just to quickly conclude, for proof of work blockchains, scale and security compete, requiring some inefficiency. In particular, scaling Bitcoin and other blockchain proof of work blockchains beyond a certain point will become self-defeating, creating a security concern that will drive users away from adopting that cryptocurrency. In contrast, for proof of stake systems, the scale is always going to enhance the security, which allows us to avoid this inefficiency. And this promotes the use of proof of stake blockchains, for example, for decentralized finance activities that require a lot of speed. Okay, so thank you very much. And that's all I had to say.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Okay, so I think Zichu Nu is the next presenter. So can you share your screen? There we go.
Yeah, can I see my screen?
Yeah, it looks good. The floor is yours.
So, hi everyone, I'm Zhichun from QuickTab. Today I'm here to present the work joined with Renchao and Jiangshan about the general congestion attack on Hashtag law contract-based payment channel network. So I think you may not be very familiar with QuickTab, so I would like to make a brief introduction. We are a Chinese company building a blockchain called CKB for novels. Back to 2019, we have proposed a layered blockchain structure and brought smart contract to TXO model. If you are interested in us, you can visit our official website for more information. Then back to today's discussion, I'd like to start with some preliminary of payment channel networks. Payment channel is a blockchain scaling protocol. The key point of it is to make payments between two parties happen off-chain. And the hashtag law contract can link isolated channels together to achieve multiple payments. I want to take the example of payments from Alice to Carol to illustrate how it works. Carol first generates a random number and computes its hash H. Next, she sends it to Alice, who then promises Bob that she will pay 6 Bitcoins to him if Bob can show the pre-image of H in 10 blocks. And the same process happens between Bob and Carol. Here, Bob only paid Carol 5 Bitcoins. The extra money in difference is payment fee used to encourage people to become the routing nodes. Carol then can show the pre-image to get paid. Then Bob knows the secrets, so he can also get a payment from Alice. Then the payment done. But HTLC has a problem. After Carol accepts the request, she can just withhold the pre-image until the contract expires. Then all the money in the past will be locked. Even worse, the action of withholding is not accountable because Lightning Network adopts onion routing. So the intermediary nodes cannot know who is the real recipient. For example, in this case, when Bob tries to blind Carol, Carol can learn that she is not the final recipient. There is a non-existent person, D, who does the evil. In addition, there is no payment happened during the griefing, so no payment fee is charged. As a result, the lock is free. With griefing attack, the adversary can create many channels with nodes in the network and initiate multiple griefing payments to generate congestion. In fact, there is already some work that explores this attack, but all of them are targeted to exhaust max concurrent HTLC, which is a parameter of payment channel. Since each HTLC needs to occupy one output, and the size of transaction is fixed, so there is a limitation to the number of pending HTLC in a channel. The most popular Lightning Network implementation, LND, chooses 483 as a default value. Then the attacker proposed to exhaust the concurrent number by initiating many griefing payments with small amounts. Then the attacked channel cannot forward any more payments since HTLC number is exhausted. However, it is still unknown that if there are other results to exhaust, also the impact of congestion on the payment is not revealed. Therefore, we propose a congestion attack targeting the balance rather than the number of concurrency. At the same time, we define some metrics to measure the liquidity so we can quantify the impact of congestion. Finally, we generalize the congestion attack in terms of strategy and metrics. Next, I would like to describe the specific steps of our attack. First, the adversary picks some nodes and establishes channels with them. Then, he enumerates the payments between these nodes by the maximum flow algorithm. Then the adversary can sort this payment according to his preference. For example, there are 3 payments. The fee charged for each channel are 3, 5, and 1 Satoshi respectively. The length of payment are 8, 6, and 5, and the amount is 3,000 for all of them. Then for adversary who with limited funding, but who want to lock as much money as possible, they should first attack longest payments, that is the payment 1. While another adversary may prefer to attack the channel with economical fee. In this case, payment 3 are favored. So the adversary can adjust the priority of payments to meet their preference. In fact, we propose 5 different strategies targeting different metrics. You can get the detailed information of in the paper. Finally, the adversary just launched the attack by rapid payment until he runs out of fundings. In the node selection, we follow the principle of choosing as few nodes as possible and unlock the majority capacity of the network. So we propose a method that first, we sort the nodes by their capacity and select the first few. Then enumerate the passes between these nodes to see if they can take the majority of the network's capacity. We test it in the existing Lightning Network topology and find that payment among 42 nodes can occupy 80% of network's capacity, which means a small number of nodes can control the majority traffic in the network. Then, to quantify the congestion, we design several metrics. In addition, a batch of random payments are simulated before and after the attack to see the impact of congestion. The metrics are the locked fund, locked money, the success rate of payments, the fee of payments, the number of attempts, and the number of bankrupt nodes. The results show that the attacker with 80 bitcoins could lock roughly 47% of network's funding, or about 280 bitcoins. The success rate of payment dropped by 16 to 60%. Then speaking from the high level, the fee, the number of payment attempts, and the bankrupt nodes all go up. Overall, the attack compromised the network's liquidity, causing a large number of payments to fail or to be sent at a higher cost. Then I want to discuss the comparison between the attack by HTLC number and our attack. There have been 2 works about exhausting the HTLC number. Tikmirov proposed to connect with both ends of one channel at a time and then initiate the attack. While Mizrahi took it a step further, she assumed that the channels with same implementation will choose the identical HTLC number, so the attacker can lock all channels in the path at once. However, the parameter can be modified by users, so we want to quantify the impact of this adjustment on these 3 attacks. Specifically, in the simulation, we change the HTLC number of some channel and keep the rest as default value. For example, in this graph, the concurrency of 2 channels have been modified. Then comes to the result. The x-axis of this graph is the amount of adversaries funding, and the y-axis is the total funding locked in the network. Different columns represent different proportion of channels changing the HTLC number. We can see that attacks by Mizrahi and Tikmirov are very effective when no channel changes the HTLC number, since the amount of their briefing payment can be very small. But as more and more channels changing the parameter, the efficiency of the attack by Mizrahi gradually decreases, because after the adjustment, the HTLC number of different channels on one path may be different. For example, the adversary intends to lock the channel among A, B, and C, but the HTLC number between B and C is changed to 134. Then after the adversary sends the same amount of griefing payments, now the BC channel becomes the bottleneck in the path. So although AB channel is still free, the adversary cannot send more payment at this time. The second figure indicates the relationship between the fee of on-chain transaction for opening channel and the locked bonding. Benefiting from our payment enumeration algorithm, we only need to establish channel with 42 nodes to send a large number of payments. In contrast, the algorithm of Tokenomics and Mizrahi needs to frequently change the sender and recipient of payments, which leads them to send a large number of transactions to the blockchain. In general, all attacks are favored if the adversary has strong capital and is not willing to pay much on-chain fee. However, if the adversary is limited in funding, the congestion with HTLC number is a better choice. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So next up, we've got Itai Sabri.
Yeah, just a second, please. Okay, do you have my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. So hi, everybody. My name is Itai Sabari. Thank you for the presentation and for the previous great talks. I'm going to show you today how to cut down Bitcoin's electricity consumption by half. This is a joint work with Alexander Spiegelman and Itai. So a quick overview. I'll start with some background about what proof of work is, why do we need it, and why it's so wasteful. Then I'll present a protocol titled Hybrid Expenditure Blockchain, acronymed HEB, which reduces the electricity consumption of pure proof of work blockchains. And then I'll present our evaluation and comparison to vanilla proof of work. So let's build the cryptocurrency. And what we actually want to achieve is an agreement on how much money everybody has. And the problem is that some of the participants might be faulty, right? They have an incentive to lie. So we know how to do this in the permission setting, which means that we know who the participants are beforehand, and we all know them by their names or public keys, for example. And the typical solutions are, let's assume that not too many of them are faulty, and then we can construct a protocol that achieves this agreement property. But when we transition to the permissionless setting, this is not so easy, because a single attacker can just masquerade as multiple entities and just pretend he has a lot of votes, and then just counting how many are faulty or non-faulty just doesn't make the cut. So this is where proof of work comes into play, and the idea is to introduce external costs to operations. For example, by requiring the participants to solve a cryptographic puzzle to take a step in the system. And this makes attacks expensive. Okay, so the attacker that wants to masquerade would have to take a lot of steps, so we'd have a lot of costs. The problem is that it burdens all the participants, not just the attacker. Okay, so even the honest participants have to pay these costs, and this is very, very expensive. And this is probably why we haven't seen proof of work before cryptocurrencies, because it was hard to set how much the operation should cost. So if we set the cost to be too expensive, then the system becomes unusable. But if we set it too low, then we didn't do anything at all, right? So just free to attack. And cryptocurrencies managed to overcome this by introducing internal rewards for honest participation. So if an honest participant takes a step in the system, he gets rewarded. This is the block reward. And as Thomas mentioned, we also assume there is some equilibrium between the external expenditure on proof of work with the internal rewards for participation. The participants are often named miners, and the operation of participating or creating blocks is called mining. and we have this sort of circle where participants, the miners, do the proof of work mining. This generates the internal tokens. The miners go to some exchange, sell the internal tokens for some external currency, go with the external currency and pay for electricity to perform the proof of work. Okay, so you have this equilibrium circle of money exchanging forms and hands. And when we dive into the specifics of the data structure, we have the blockchain, which is a linked list of elements named blocks. And as previously mentioned, the more money you spend on electricity, the higher the chance you get to create a block, and the higher the chance you get to get the block reward. In my example, 1 token per block. So how do we set the price, or what happens if the price changes? And specifically, what happens if the token prices go up? So what we get is higher external reward, incentivizing more miners to invest in the system and throw in money and electricity. This results with higher electricity consumption, which on one hand is good because the system is more secure now, it's more costly to attack. But then on the other hand, it's more wasteful. We waste more energy on the system. And as we know, Bitcoin prices have skyrocketed in the recent years, resulting with the consumption and the carbon footprint of country, in the scale of countries, right? So this is a lot of consumption just for proof of work. And the question is, can we avoid it? Are there any alternatives? And yes, there was an alternative suggested, named proof of stake. And the idea is to replace the external expenditure with the cost of internally owning the tokens. Okay, so no external expenditure at all, but instead the miners now have to hold the system tokens in order to create blocks. But proof of stake has a few shortcomings, and the one that I found the most severe is that it turns the system into permission system. Why is that? Because to obtain tokens, the miners have to obtain the system tokens beforehand. And to obtain the tokens, they need the permission or the authorization of the previous owners. And they don't really have, the latter don't really have an incentive to allow that. And a few more assumptions. Some systems, for security reasons, have to assume that users voluntarily delete their private data. So they're done using their secret keys, then they safely manage to delete them. Or alternatively, that users are available for extended period of times. Again, these assumptions do not apply to proof of work or are not needed in proof of work. Okay, so now I'll present our solution called hybrid expenditure blockchain, which its design goals are as follows. We want to have a cryptocurrency that has the same proof of work guarantees. We want it to be incentive compatible, secure, and permissionless, but we want it to be less externally wasteful, and in my example, half less wasteful. So let's see how we achieve this. Instead of having the circle of proof of work mining, now let's look at hybrid mining. And the main intuition is that instead of having the miners use all their internal rewards, essentially go to the exchange, get currency, and spend it on electricity, we're going to incentivize them to spend a portion of it back into the part of the mining process. Okay, so instead of using all the rewards externally, they're going to shift some of the reward back into the mining process, thus reducing the external reward, thus reducing the external expenditure. This is the main intuition and motivation. And how we achieve this? Using the following mechanism. So as I said, miners now have two options to expand their budget. The first is externally spending dollars on electricity. This is like in vanilla proof of work, or they can spend their tokens internally as part of the mining process. This is the addition of HAB. And going even more specifics on the protocol, instead of distributing the rewards after each block, we're gonna consider epochs of L blocks. Okay, so L is a system parameter, in my example 4, and we're gonna give all the rewards at the end of the epoch. Okay, so if we want to have a comparable system to vanilla proof of work, instead of giving one token when one block is created, we're just going to give four tokens at the end of the epoch, and we're going to share this reward among the system miners, obviously. Now, this is another angle of the protocol. We have two types of blocks. The first are regular blocks. They have this attribute weight, which has a value of 1. We have an additional type of blocks called factor blocks. They have another attribute. They have their weight attribute as the value of f, which is greater than 1. And to create these blocks, the miners would have to internally expand the tokens, and specifically row tokens per block. So additional two parameters, two system parameters, f and row. I'll repeat that. Two types of blocks, regular blocks with weight 1, factor blocks with weight f greater than 1 that require internal expenditure. And as in vanilla proof of work, the probability to create any block is proportional to the external expenditure. Okay, so blocks are created as in vanilla proof of work. The way we split the rewards among the miners is based on their relative epoch weight. Okay, so in this example, we have 3 regular blocks and 1 factor blocks. So the total weight would be f plus 3. The green miner created 2 blocks, 2 regular blocks, so his weight is 2. So he gets the portion of 2 over f plus 3. The orange miner created 1 factor block, so his weight is f, so he gets f over f plus 3. And the blue miner created 1 regular block, so his weight is 1, and he gets 1 over f plus 3. Okay, and they all share the 4 tokens based on these rewards, on these ratios, sorry. Okay, when we look at mining, we often model this as a game, okay? And the miners are the players, and they want to maximize their mining rewards. And for that, we need to present the honest strategy that we want miners to exhibit in HEB. So this strategy is as follows. We want them to extend the longest chain and publish blocks immediately. This is the same as the honest mining strategy in proof of work blockchains. Now we have 2 more considerations to make. So the first is how they allocate their budgets, and we want them to allocate raw of their budget internally, meaning to spend the raw of their budget on buying the ability to create factor blocks, and 1 minus row externally, meaning on proof of work. And the last decision, excuse me, the last decision that miners need to make is when to create factor blocks and when to create regular ones. And we want them to create factor blocks when they can. Okay, so if you bought the right to create a factor block, we want you to do that. This is the strategy we want the miners to play. So let's evaluate this protocol. First and foremost, our goal was to reduce the expenditure, the external expenditure, which we achieve because now instead of row of all the block reward being wasted externally, now only 1 minus row is. Okay, so we achieved a waste factor of 1 minus row. Now let's see that it's actually secure and that no miner can cheat and gain some unfair advantage. And the way we do that is ask ourselves, when is the honest mining in Nash equilibrium? And we know from proof of work blockchains that this holds only if no miner has higher control over some fraction of the network. And we compare ourselves to a paper by Sapirstein et al. From FC16, and they show that for Bitcoin, this value is 0.232, meaning that if a miner controls more than that fraction from the network, then he is able to perform various attacks. We use the same analysis technique and show that for HEB, this value is 0.2 when we consider rho equals half. So this is almost as good as Bitcoin for the most extreme value, and we get a better value if we manage to if we allow ourselves to have a lower external if we have more external waste, then we can even improve this value. Also, by increasing the value of the factor blocks, we managed to improve this value. Let me just say that even for our almost as good result, this is still suffices when we consider the current mining pool. The largest miner is of 17%, which is lower than this threshold. So given today's distribution, HAB is still secure. The second parameter we consider is the profit from centralization. We want to show that miners can get more by becoming centralized, because we want a decentralized system. And in HAB, we show that this profit is negligible in the epoch length. So increasing the epoch means decreases this value. Also, if we consider lower F values, this improves. And for practical parameters, the profit from forming coalitions is less than 0.1%. Okay, so this is really not an issue. And let me just say that for practical reasons, it's really insignificant, because we know miners have economy of scale considerations, and they have network considerations, which completely diminish this effect. We also analyzed the attack costs. Basically, remember, we add proof of work because we want to make we wanted to have blocks expensive to create, because that would deter attacks. And the way we measure that is by considering two types of these attacks. The first is the refundable variation. We know that if some attacker manages to create a lot of blocks, well, it's going to be costly, but then it's going to have a lot of block rewards. So this type of attack actually refunds itself if it's successful. And for HAB, this is the same. The attacker doesn't get an advantage because we have this separation of internal and external expenditures, because he would still have to spend internally to have his blocks factored, so he'd get his money's worth back when the attack is successful. So no, it's the same security in that sense. If the attacker is willing to forfeit the reward from the attack, which doesn't make much sense to me, but it's still an option, then the attack becomes cheaper. It's still very expensive, just a bit cheaper, and you'd have to have some exogenous utility justifying that. But we are not aware of any of such sabotage attacks happening in practice. Okay, so this is not really likely as we see it. The last metric would be permissiveness. We want to show that HAB is open to newly arriving miners, meaning that they wouldn't need the permission of the current miners. And this holds because, well, in the first epoch, if the newly joining miner isn't able to get tokens, then yes, he can't create factor blocks, which means a reduce in the reward. But this is only like a one-time entry thing, because in the following blocks, in the following epochs, you would have tokens from the regular blocks he created, and you'd be able to expand internally and create factor blocks, etc. So this is like a one-time thing for newly joining miners. And let me say this is a qualitative improvement over proof of stake, because in proof of stake you can get anything, right? If you can't get the tokens, then you're out of the game. You can't play anymore. To conclude, HAB is a tunable proof of work protocol with the main idea of reducing the external waste. You can tune it by the F, the rho, and the L parameters. It has similar security guarantees to vanilla proof of work. It is permissionless, and for practical parameters, it's half as wasteful as Bitcoin. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Itai. If people have, there's been some questions in the chat that it's been a little bit of a conversation, but if people have questions they'd like to ask out loud, please go ahead and raise your hands. In any case, shortly we'll be moving to breakout rooms. I think Hannah's going to create one for each of the papers. Is that right, Hannah?
Yes. So, I mean, we still have 5 minutes here for general discussion, and we can utilize it. Otherwise, I can start the breakout rooms. sooner and we're going to have longer break, that's not a problem. I think, yeah, there is this discussion in the chat going on. So
shall I mute myself?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is about the third paper, I think, or the second paper that we'd seen on the economics implication of scaling blockchains. So let me start by saying that I really enjoyed reading that paper. And also, I think like it's a really good kind of question, like what are the different security features that you get if you kind of do an economic analysis of different security protocols. So I think that's an excellent area for research. And then like my question and also was also asked by Key Feng, and he was actually the first one to raise it during this session, is like what is the opportunity cost or the liquidity cost of actually staking coins? Because I think in the model, the way that has been modeled in the paper is basically there's essentially no cost of staking coins, but in practice there can be liquidity costs involved with staking coins, or even you could even say perhaps the cost of capital of investing in those coins. So kind of my question would be, is well, it's not there in the paper, I believe, but did you kind of explore if you kind of were to incorporate such an cost of capital, how would that potentially change your conclusion? And for example, like there you have this limit theory that kind of in the end, like for proof of work, you cannot kind of have infinite many transactions, but for proof of stake, basically because there's this cost of mining, but that seems also to be the case for proof of stake if there's really a cost of staking coins.
Yeah, so thanks for your comments. Thanks for the question. So the main driver of these results is the fact that the fees reduce as you increase the scale. So you could very well introduce an opportunity cost of staking. In principle, this would make proof of work cryptocurrencies a little bit more attractive because you don't have to lock up your cryptocurrency while you trade it. In the model, we're just assuming you have deterministic liquidation time. So this doesn't really matter for us. It's always optimal to stake until that liquidation time. But you can imagine that as you increase the scale, right, you can decrease the epochs, the length of time that you have to stake for. And so you can sort of get around this issue that, yes, there's an opportunity cost, but if you decrease the amount of time that you have to stake for, that you have to lock up your cryptocurrency for, then this would lower the opportunity cost. Of course, if the opportunity cost is just too high, that will be an issue for proof of stake blockchains. But it's relative to the, I guess, the amount of time that you have to lock it up for.
Right, and I guess like I understand like theoretically in some sense kind of you can get around that liquidity cost, but my question would be more like, suppose you cannot get rid of that liquidity cost. How would that kind of affect like the comparison?
So you still have this effect that the scale will improve user utility, even accounting for this opportunity cost, because you're paying lower fees and your transactions are being processed faster when you want to make those transactions. So you still get this result that scaling improves the user utility for proof of stake blockchain, and it decreases security for proof of work blockchain. So the sort of comparison will still be that proof of work is improving, proof of stake is improving in scale, the utility of the users, whereas proof of work is decreasing the utility of the users. And now the question is basically, where is the starting point because once you introduce this type of opportunity cost, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. I was planning to do this offline, but since we had some time left, and there was the discussion in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks.
So if there are no other questions, kind of general questions, and we are also at time, I'm going to still open up the breakout rooms, and I will ask the authors of the papers to join the breakout rooms, and people who would like to chat, maybe less formally, then you can just join the breakout rooms. Now it should be